I thank the three speakers for extremely varied and stimulating perspectives on, the influences in Thomas More's Utopia. It seems to me that although, you see, we have the representation of utopia as a kind of idealized vision of the world, of government, of religion, and so on, that More had his feet firmly rooted in realities, the reality of London life, and this was shown to us by Professor Capinelli. Then perhaps also ideas, coming about India and merchandise, a kind of reaction against capitalism and the evils of merchandise, of a kind of merchandise economy, material values, and so on, and the influence, which is of course very important, of Erasmus and the Low Countries and his stay in Antwerp. So you see, but my question would be about this kind of link between Erasmus' own life experience and the way he relates and reacts to it in Utopia. If you allow me, I have a question for each speaker, a very, very short question. What struck me in the map you gave us, Professor Capinelli, is that as Erasmus moved along Holborn Street and saw what you described, the butchers, the prisoners, the hangings and quarterings, he started from Milk Street. You see, and this kind of reaction against cruelty to animals, against, you see, the importance of meats and offal and so on. Well, I believe in the semantics, you see, in the force, the power of the signifier. Milk Street, you see, it reminds me of Lady Macbeth. Thou art too full of human kindness. You see, thou sucked the milk of human kindness. So would More have sucked the milk of human kindness from his original Milk Street? I mean, have you thought about it, or is it just a kind of chance remark?
Several of the names indicated who the guilds or the workers were in those particular areas. So there was a Bread Street, a Milk Street. There may be some symbolic element there, but then of course it could have been accidental that that's where his father moved to. His father's parents evidently were from right around Fleet Street and Chancery Lane, right, that area where St. Dunstan's in the west was located. But his grandfather was a baker, and so there was a lot of commercial traffic having to do with foodstuffs. And so I'm not sure exactly why they ended up on Milk Street, but that is
it was just chance.
But it was very close to the Guildhall, and very much at the center of London political life. And his father, John More, was a lawyer, very much involved in the political life of the city. And Thomas More himself became an under sheriff of London, and a very good friend of the commercial class that lived in his neighborhood. So I'm sure that he was, on the one hand, highly critical of extreme wealth and of public show, and ostentation and conspicuous consumption. But at the same time, I do believe that he supported what essentially was an entrepreneurial, capitalistic type of economy. Now, try to balance that with Franciscanism.
Contradiction, yes, ambivalence. I have a question also for our second speaker about India. From what you said, especially the idea of wealth coming from, you see, this region of the world, this representation of the East, essentially based on material goods, kind of material culture. So how do you put this in perspective with Utopia, which is normally a kind of reformation of social order and social evils in society? Is this compatible from your point of view? And there's also another thing about the Muslim aspect of India. You said that Hinduism and Christianity were accepted as, well, variants of the same vision of a religious world. How about Muslim polygamy? Would that have been a kind of shock or a scandal, you see, to Thomas More himself?
I think that there are two points to be made in connection to Thomas More's Utopia. You're mentioning the material side.
What you said about silk.
Yeah, that is one thing. But maybe first the other one, which is more the spiritual side. Like Thomas More and many of the other critical thinkers of the 16th century were trying to identify a kind of purer Christianity and trying to trace back the origins and the true values of Christianity. And the concepts of India and also Ethiopia were referring to this kind of pure Christianity.
The land of Prester John in Mandeville.
Yes, that is one very famous story. So in that sense, India was an open invitation to criticize the way Christianity was perceived, or actually how it was in reality in the 16th century. And literally, if you look at some of the Jesuit sources, they compare the 16th century. Later on, it's becoming a different story, but they compare Brahma, Shiva, and Vishnu to the Christian Trinity.
Like the Neoplatonists and
they almost absolutely want to see something of Christianity in Hinduism. That's the 16th century. Later on, it changes. So that is one thing. And then on the other thing, you mentioned Islam, and you also mentioned the material wealth. So Islam was blocking the way to this material wealth, which was from India. So Islam was the enemy, and they were looking for a kind of ally also in India. So that is the other connection. And yes, it's a material utopia. With everything that was soft, literally, came from India. So something soft was Indian.
Yeah.
So in the mentality, you kind of identify softness with this concept of India. And again, I'm speaking about the 16th, 17th century. Later on, this will gradually change.
Well, there is Midsummer Night's Dream in Shakespeare, when Titania speaks of the votaress of her order, who is pregnant, and describes her like a ship laden with rich merchandise in the spiced Indian air. See, so spices and India, you see, something exotic and rich at the same time, and fabulous, see, linked with a dream.
But that's the conventional way of approaching it, is to emphasize the spices. But actually, the textiles were much more important, both in value and in in quantity.
Okay, thank you very much. And I have also one question about precisely the influence of the organization of the Low Countries. You gave us a number of arguments about the influence of Antwerp, and showed us the two maps by the two engravings that looked really similar. Do you think it was due to Erasmus? How did More meet Erasmus? Was it in Antwerp, or was it before? Did they correspond? Sorry, I'm very ignorant about the relationship.
Gillis and More were two main friends of Erasmus who didn't know each other. So it was Erasmus who arranged the contact completely. There's a letter, we have it, from Erasmus to Peter Giles, Peter Gillis in English, Peter Giles, and let's say Peter Gillis, because that was his Dutch name. Okay, Peter Gillis, and in which Erasmus is asking explicitly to Peter Gillis to make everything ready for the arrival of one of his closest friends, Thomas More, and to show him all kindness and offer him complete hospitality. And in the same time, we don't have a written account of that, but during the trade negotiation in Bruges itself, where Thomas More was negotiating with representatives of the Habsburg government in Brussels, of political leaders from Brussels, and Erasmus slipped through Bruges. We don't know what they have said, but I really have the feeling and the theory that Erasmus also directed the staging of Thomas More in Antwerp, and of course without the mediation of Erasmus, Thomas More would even wasn't even able to meet Gillis because he wouldn't have known him altogether. That was, and then there's one very conspicuous thing still. The trade negotiation there in Bruges was just intended to be completed fully, and then the English mission would just go back to London. But all of a sudden, negotiations were interrupted. And at this moment, 1516, we have in power some very important political men, for example, Jean le Sauvage, in power in Brussels, who had the strings in his hands to say, okay, now I'm interrupting these negotiations. And then Thomas More got the opportunity to travel on to Antwerp. And this Jean le Sauvage is not well known. Next year there'll be a first presentation, perhaps, or article about this figure. And this Jean le Sauvage is very, very important. We have a letter of Thomas More also, again, to Erasmus of 31st of October 1516, in which Thomas More explicitly asks Erasmus how Utopia is received by political men, Pieter Gillis, Cuthbert Tunstall, and Jean le Sauvage. And Thomas More is saying, if this Jean le Sauvage should have lived on the Isle of Utopia, he would have been the prince.
I see. Interesting. So we have a few minutes left for questions from the floor.
Perhaps we can continue on introducing Thomas More and Erasmus, because what you didn't say needs to be said would be that they were firm friends, but from the 1490s already. Erasmus had been to England and had been received there very well, and then also accommodated in Thomas More's home. And they had written together or revised the Praise of Folly. So, you know, More wanted to come to see Erasmus many times. And I think apparently he did not in those days that you mentioned, because that wasn't possible. But then,
still,
they were friends from before.
Yeah. And in these 1490 years, one of the first, enterprises of More and Erasmus together was a translation of Lucian about tyrannicide, so also very political.
Excuse me, how did Gillis meet More? You said they were friends before Erasmus.
No. They weren't friends, and Erasmus brought them together. Yeah. And but also very interesting in that perspective, Erasmus and Gillis. Erasmus met Gillis in the printing house of these Dirk Martens for the first time. Gillis was working there as a corrector. He had done legal studies in Orléans, and he had quit his law study, and to arrange his living, he started working there in the printing house of Dirk Martens, then in beginning 16th century in Antwerp, and later on he moved to Leuven. Gillis picked up again his law studies, but not again in Orléans, but at the University of Leuven, and it was very easy, is it a coincidence or not, that the printing house of Dirk Martens moved from Antwerp to Leuven. Maybe it was an arrangement to make the study of Gillis more practical, because he was studying and doing corrector's work at the same time. And in this printing house, during the publication of the Panegyricus, the first political work of Erasmus, he met Pieter Gillis in this printing house. Yeah.
So that's it. So thank you very much. Let's follow our speakers. Thank you all.